Good morning, boys and girls. This is Miss Nancy from the Upper Chichester Library in Upper Chichester. I hope you're all ready to settle down and listen to a couple of stories that I'm going to read to you. The first one I'm going to read is called Curious George. It was written by H.A. Ray. It's about a little monkey who is very curious, and his curiosity sometimes gets him into trouble. This is George. He lived in Africa. He was a good little monkey, but he was always curious. One day, George saw a man. He had on a large yellow straw hat. The man saw George too. What a nice little monkey, he thought. I would like to take him home with me. He put his hat on the ground, and of course, George was curious. He came down from the tree to look at the large yellow hat. The hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice to have it on his own head. So he picked it up and he put it on. Looks like it's a little big for George, doesn't it? The hat covered George's head. He couldn't see. The man picked him up quickly and popped him into a bag. George was caught. What do you think is going to happen to George? Let's find out. The man with the big yellow hat put George into a little boat, and a sailor rowed them both across the water to a big ship. George was sad, but he was still a little curious. On the big ship, things began to happen. The man took off the bag. George sat on a little stool, and the man said to him, "George, I'm going to take you to a big zoo in a big city. You're going to like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into trouble." George promised to be good. But it is easy for little monkeys to forget not to get into trouble. On the deck, he found some seagulls. He wondered how they could fly. He was very curious. Finally, he had to try. It looked easy. But does George have wings? I don't think so. Oh, what happened? First this, then this. Where is George? See, they're all looking through their spyglasses. The sailors looked and looked. At last they saw him, struggling in the water, and almost all tired out. At least he knew how to swim. "Man overboard!" the sailors cried as they threw him a life belt. George caught it and held on. At last he was safe on board. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey, until at last the long trip was over. George said goodbye to the kind sailors, and he and the man with the yellow hat walked off the ship and on to the shore, and then on into the city to the man's house. After a good meal and a good pipe, George felt very tired. Well, there he is, sitting up on some books, having his dinner. And there he is, smoking a pipe. And it looks like he's putting on some of the man in the yellow hat's pajamas because they're way too big for George. He crawled into bed and fell asleep at once. Well, he had had quite an adventure, coming all the way from the jungle to a big zoo in a big city. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him. He was fascinated. Then the man went away. George was curious. He wanted to telephone too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What fun! You can see him dialing using the phone. That's kind of an old-fashioned phone that maybe your grandparents might have used at one time. Ding-a-ling, ding-a-ling, George had telephoned the fire station by accident. The firemen rushed to the telephone. "Hello, hello," they said, but there was no answer. Then they looked for the signal on the big map that showed where the telephone call had come from. They didn't know it was George. They thought it was a real fire. "Hurry, hurry, hurry!" The firemen jumped onto the fire engines and onto the hook and ladders. Ding dong, ding dong! Everyone out of the way. Hurry, hurry! That's what fire trucks do so they can get to the fire to put it out quickly. The firemen rushed into the house. They opened the door. Well, there was no fire, only a naughty little monkey. "Oh, catch him, they cried. George tried to run away. He almost did, but he got caught in the telephone wire. There he is. All the firemen are chasing him. A thin fireman caught one arm, and a fat fireman caught the other. "You fooled the fire department," they said. "We will have to shut you up where you can't do any more harm." They took him away and they shut him in prison. Oh, he doesn't look any too happy there, sitting in a prison cell. George wanted to get out. He climbed up to the window to try the bars. Just then the watchman came in. He got on the wooden bed to catch George, but he was too big and heavy. The bed tipped up, the watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran out through the open door. There he goes, out through that open door. He is a very sly little monkey, isn't he? He hurried through the building and out onto the roof. And then, he was lucky to be a monkey. Out he walked onto the telephone wires. Quickly and quietly over the guard's head, George walked away. He was free. Down in the street outside the prison wall stood a balloon man with all these nice colorful balloons. A little girl bought a balloon for her brother, and George watched. He was curious again. He felt he must have a bright red balloon. He reached over and tried to help himself. But instead of one balloon, the whole bunch broke loose, and in an instant, the wind whisked them all away, and with them went George, holding tight with both hands. Here he is being carried aloft with all of those balloons. Up, up he sailed, higher and higher. The houses looked like tiny toy houses, and the people like dolls from up where he was. George was frightened. He held on very tight. At first, the wind blew in great gusts. Then it quieted. Finally, it stopped blowing altogether. George was very tired. Down, down he went, bump, onto the top of a traffic light. Everyone was surprised. The traffic got all mixed up. George did not know what to do. And then he heard someone call, "George, George!" He looked down and saw his friend, the man with the big yellow hat. George was very happy. The man with the yellow hat was very happy. George slid down the post, and the man with the big yellow hat put him under his arm. Then he paid the balloon man for all of the balloons, and then George and the man climbed into the car, and at last away they went. To the zoo. What a nice place for George to live. And see, in the zoo he had other animals that he could talk to, and balloons to play with, and a nice tree to climb. There are lots of other stories about Curious George, and we'll read some of them as time goes by. I hope you enjoyed that. And remember, you can always get this book at our library. Now, the next story that I'm going to read to you is called A Friend for Life, and it's from Walt Disney's The Jungle Book. So we're going to learn about some new people here. It's a totally different story, and this is a Walt Disney story. Mowgli, this is Mowgli, liked living in the man village. It wasn't the carefree life he had known in the jungle with Baloo, but after his chores were done, he had plenty of time to explore and to play with his new friends. It looks like he has 4 new friends here. Today, he had entertained the children with the story of how Baloo dressed up like a monkey and danced with King Louie. How everyone laughed, and so did Mowgli. The more he thought about the buddies he had left behind in the jungle, the more Mowgli missed them. I don't see any reason why I can't go back for a visit, Mowgli said to himself. Imagine how surprised Baloo and Bagheera will be to see me. Next, Mowgli asked the chief of the village for permission to make the journey. The chief agreed, so Mowgli tied some food up in a large palm leaf, you can see right there. He took a hollow gourd for a drinking cup and headed off on his trip by himself. Oh, he looks very relaxed here. Mowgli strolled through the jungle he knew so well. He answered the calls of a parrot, climbed a small mountain of boulders, and skipped rocks across a stream. After a while, he stopped to have something to eat. Then he leaned against a tree because he was ready to have an afternoon snooze. I know probably a lot of you take little afternoon naps too. Sometimes a nap is called a snooze. The man cub dreamed that Shere Khan was stalking him through the jungle. And if you look at the picture, you can see the stripes of the tiger there. In his dream, he never saw the tiger's face, but he could hear the plants rustling behind him and knew the beast was close by. Mowgli awaked to the sound of shaking leaves. Shere Khan, he thought to himself, feeling just a little scared. When he had lived in the jungle, he had not been afraid of the tiger, but now he knew it was smart to fear certain creatures. He imagined that he saw a flash of orange and black stripes near the rocks just beyond him. Mowgli took a deep breath, rubbed his eyes, and looked around him. Everything appeared just as it had before he'd fallen asleep. That's what happens when you have too many bananas before a nap, Mowgli said with a chuckle. Mowgli picked up his parcel of food and went over to the river to wash. As he splashed the cold water on his face, he heard a low moan behind him. He turned and saw a tigress slouching towards the cover of some bushes. So it wasn't a dream after all, Mowgli thought. He stayed still and quiet, watching the tigress's slow, painful movements. No tigress I have ever seen walks like that, he decided. She must be hurt and in pain. Even though Mowgli knew that it might be dangerous, he slowly approached the tigress. When he was close enough for her to catch his scent, she raised her head out of the bushes to investigate. She growled, hoping this could be enough to scare the boy away. Mowgli stopped where he stood and he said, "My name is Mowgli, and I was just wondering, are you all right?" "Leave now, or I'll have you for my dinner," answered the tigress. She tried to sound fierce, but her voice was very tired. Oh my, look what we have here. This tigress has some little baby tigers. Mowgli crept a little closer to the bush. Now he could see that the tigress had a litter of cubs. Alarmed, the tigress tried to raise herself up. She knew she was too weak to truly frighten the boy. Not knowing what else to do, she said, "Please leave me alone. If you harm me, my cubs will have no one to care for them." "But I don't want to harm you. I want to help you," replied Mowgli. "Help me?" answered the tigress. "But men kill tigers with their guns and their fire." "Don't worry," Mowgli reassured her. "I don't have either one of those." Just then one of the cubs became curious and bounded over to Mowgli. Mowgli smiled at his boldness and scratched him behind the ears. The tigress relaxed just a little. Maybe this boy truly didn't mean them any harm. "My name is Sheba," she said softly. Mowgli sat down on the ground opposite Sheba, and within seconds all of the cubs were climbing in his lap. "How did you get hurt?" Mowgli asked their mother. "A few days ago I was hunting for food," Sheba began. "I slipped and fell down a steep cliff. I was badly injured, and it took me a long time to climb back up the rocks. But I kept going because I knew I had to return to my babies." "Then what?" Mowgli wanted to know. "I've been resting in these bushes ever since, unable to hunt," Sheba replied. "Luckily, my cubs don't eat meat yet. They are still happy to drink their fill of milk." And of course, Sheba, like all mammals, is able to feed her babies with milk from her own body. "Do you feel any better?" Mowgli asked. "My bruises are healing, but I am very tired," Sheba admitted. "I haven't been able to sleep. Since I can't protect my cubs, I need to make sure that they are hidden and safe whenever any danger nears." Mowgli dared to inch a bit closer to the proud mother tigress. "I still think I can help you if you'll let me," he said. Sheba was taken by surprise. "I still don't understand," she told him. "Why are you being so kind?" Mowgli smiled. "When I was a baby," he began, "a wolf family adopted me and raised me." See, that's a mama wolf and her babies. "Then, when I was older, my friends Baloo and Bagheera took care of me and protected me from Shere Khan. Later, when I arrived at the man village, the strangers there welcomed me. I have learned that we all need to look after each other when we live in the jungle together." "All right then," Sheba agreed. "What is your plan?" "Well, before we talk any more, I think you should eat," Mowgli said. He unwrapped his parcel of food and he offered it to her. Then he took the hollow gourd he carried with him and ran down to the river. As he bent to fill it, the cubs came racing after him and jumped on him with all their might. Mowgli lost his balance and fell straight into the river. The cubs thought this was a wonderful game and joined him in the shallow water. "Hey!" cried Mowgli, pretending to scold them. "Cut that out." See, they were jumping on his back and they wanted to play because they're just babies. As Sheba watched Mowgli playing with her cubs, she began to trust him just a little more. And she was grateful when he brought her the gourd of cool water to drink. Maybe he would be able to help her after all. "I am going to visit some friends of mine," Mowgli explained. "They don't live far from here. Why don't you and your cubs come with me? You can stay with them for as long as it takes you to get better. And they could watch over your cubs while you rest. They won't mind. After all, They used to take care of me all the time. The cubs crowded around their mother. It was clear that they liked this strange boy who didn't behave like all the other young men they had run into. Finally, Sheba decided that, like it or not, she really had no choice. For the good of her cubs, she had to follow the boy. But she had one last question. Why are you so different from other men? She wondered. Maybe it's because I'm not a man, but a man cub, Mowgli answered, and then he laughed and howled just the way the wolves had taught him to do. Remember, he was brought up by the wolves. Meanwhile, in a clearing in the jungle, Baloo and Bagheera were just saying goodbye to Rama, his mate, and their new litter of puppies. See, that's Rama and his mate, and this is a new litter of wolf puppies. Those pups remind me of how young and helpless Mowgli was when I first came across him, Baloo remembered. I sure do miss him. I miss him too, Bagheera agreed, although I'll never forget all the trouble he caused when we tried to take him to the man village. He's probably so grown up he could scare off Shere Khan all by himself. Bagheera shook his head. Oh, Baloo, don't be ridiculous. He's only been gone a month, and it takes a while for boys to grow into manhood, that's for sure. Now, this is Baloo, and this is Bagheera. Later that afternoon, Mowgli appeared out of the bushes. Little buddy, exclaimed Baloo, we were just talking about you. I knew one day you'd come back to pay your old Papa Bear of... Baloo froze in fear as he caught sight of Sheba and her cubs coming up behind Mowgli. Look out, he warned, look out. Oh, it's all right, Baloo, Mowgli said. These are my new friends. Then he explained why he had brought Sheba and her offspring for a visit. Mowgli, have you taken leave of your senses? Asked Bagheera. Don't you know that all tigers are like Shere Khan? You can't trust them for a moment. Who knows what they'll do when your back is turned? I think we should go now, Sheba said to Mowgli. I knew this was a bad idea. She tried to gather up her cubs, but they were all having too much fun learning how to spar from Baloo. I think you should rest a while first, Mowgli suggested. Exhausted, the tigress agreed. She lay down under a tree nearby, keeping one eye on her cubs. Soon, Bagheera, Baloo, and Mowgli were sharing stories of recent adventures and remembering their past adventures together. After a while, Mowgli thought it was time to bring his new friend into the group. Why don't you tell everyone how you, Mowgli began, but Sheba was fast asleep. Remember, she's very tired because of her wound. By the time Sheba awoke, Baloo and Bagheera had decided the cubs couldn't possibly return to the jungle with an injured mother. And by the next day, they realized that not all tigers were like Shere Khan. They happily took care of the noble tigress and her family until she was strong again. As she prepared to leave, Sheba said gratefully, "Thank you for your kindness. If there is ever anything I can do for you, please send word, and I promise I will come and help." Because lending a hand is what good neighbors do, be they tigers, bears, panthers, or man cubs do. Mowgli met a tigress. He could have run in fear. If she had been stronger, she might not have let him near. Soon between these strangers, a seed of friendship grew. Like many so-called enemies, They shared more than they knew. And that is the end of this story. Now, I would just like to remind you about some of the things that our library is doing this summer. Mr. Andrew reads stories and sings songs at the Kingsman Park in Upper Chichester. We're hoping that will be the future home of our library, too. He has come back because everyone very much enjoys singing with Mr. Andrew and listening to the stories that he has to tell. And the other thing that I just want to remind you about is that at the Upper Chichester Municipal Building on Tuesday nights throughout July, there will be programs that might be of interest to you. The next one will be July the 13th, and it's called the Pirates Dock for a Visit on Tuesday at 6:30. And there will be two more after that. On the 20th, there will be a K-9 officer, Lou, who will be visiting. And then on the 27th, we will have an end of the summer ice cream social. And for any of you who have not done so, you're so welcome to come to the library and sign up for the reading program that we have all summer long. You earn points by reading your books, and you win prizes. And of course, at the end of the summer, there's an ice cream party. So I hope you enjoyed our stories, and I hope to see you again next week. Goodbye for now.